The road was quiet when the cowboy rode through the open land. His name was Tom. He was a simple man who lived near the hills and worked with animals most of his life. He knew the sound of the wind, the smell of dry soil, and the weight of long days. That evening, the sky was soft with fading light, and the land looked tired after weeks without rain. Tom guided his horse slowly, thinking about nothing in particular. He was heading back home after checking fences far from his ranch. As he moved closer to an old and used field, his horse suddenly slowed down on its own. Tom noticed this and looked ahead. Near a broken wooden fence, something small moved. At first, he thought it was just shadows. Then he saw them clearly. 2 donkeys were standing near a dry ditch. They were thin, very thin. Their ribs showed through their skin, and their heads hung low. They were not walking. They were barely standing. Tom stopped completely. His heart felt heavy in his chest. He climbed down from his horse and stood still for a moment. The donkeys noticed him. They did not run away. They lifted their heads slowly and looked straight at him. Their eyes were dark and tired. There was no fear in them. Only silence and need. Tom took a few careful steps forward. The donkeys stayed where they were. One leaned slightly toward the other, as if drawing strength from standing close. Tom had seen sick animals before. He had helped injured horses and weak calves. But this moment felt different. These donkeys looked like they had been waiting. Waiting for anyone. Waiting for help. He bent down and rested his hands on his knees. He looked at their legs and their sides. He could see how weak they were. Their breathing was slow. One of them made a soft sound, barely louder than the wind. That sound broke something inside Tom. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. He turned his head, but his body did not listen. He felt his chest tighten and his breath shake. He dropped to one knee on the dry ground. Tears fell freely as he looked at the earth. Tom had lived a hard life. He had lost people. He had faced long winters and lonely nights. But seeing these donkeys standing there, holding on with nothing left, made his heart ache in a way he did not expect. He wiped his face slowly and took a deep breath. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. He told them they were not alone anymore. He told them he would not leave them there. The donkeys watched him closely. The gray one took a small step forward. Its legs shook, but it did not fall. The brown one followed, staying close. Tom reached out his hand slowly and gently touched the gray donkey's neck. It did not pull away. The sun sank lower. Shadows grew longer across the land. Tom looked around and saw no house nearby. No water. No food. Nothing but dry grass and broken wood. It was clear the donkeys had been left behind. That thought made his tears return, but this time he stayed strong. Tom stood up and walked back to his horse. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out what little food he had saved for the ride home. It was not much, but it was all he had. He placed it carefully on the ground a short distance from the donkeys. They hesitated at first. Then slowly, they stepped forward and began to eat. They did not rush. They shared quietly, side by side. Tom watched without moving, afraid to scare them. After they finished, Tom poured the last of his water into a small bowl. The donkeys drank carefully. When they were done, they stood still again, as if unsure what would happen next. Tom knew he could not leave them there. Night was coming, and the land grew cold after sunset. He thought about his ranch. It was not big, but it was safe. He had an old shelter that could be used. He found a soft rope and tied it loosely so it would not hurt them. He spoke calmly as he did. The donkeys allowed it. That alone told him how tired they were. The walk back was slow. Very slow. Tom walked beside them, matching their steps. When one stumbled, he stopped and waited. He did not rush. He did not complain. Stars appeared in the sky by the time they reached his land. Tom opened the shelter and led them inside. He laid fresh straw on the ground and made sure they were comfortable. He stayed with them for a long time, watching their breathing. That night, Tom did not sleep much. He sat near the shelter, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch. Every now and then, he looked inside to make sure the donkeys were still standing. As the night passed, Tom thought about how close he had been to riding past that broken fence. One small choice had stopped him. One moment had changed everything. He looked up at the stars and felt a calm settle over him. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The donkeys were weak, and recovery would take time. But in his heart, he knew one thing clearly. He had done the right thing. Morning came slowly to the ranch. The sky was pale, and the air felt cool and quiet. Tom had not slept much during the night. He stood up as soon as the light touched the land and walked toward the shelter. His steps were careful, and his heart felt heavy with worry. Inside the shelter, the two donkeys were still there. They stood close to each other, just as they had the night before. When they saw Tom, their ears moved slightly. That small movement filled him with hope. It meant they had made it through the night. Tom took a deep breath and stepped inside. He moved slowly so he would not scare them. He checked their legs, their sides, and their eyes. They were still very weak, but they were alive. That alone felt like a gift. He brought fresh water and placed it gently on the ground. The donkeys drank little by little. After that, he prepared soft food that would be easy for them to eat. He had learned over the years that weak animals needed patience, not force. While they ate, Tom sat nearby on an old wooden crate. He watched them quietly. The gray donkey lifted its head now and then, looking at him. The brown one stayed close, never moving far away. Tom noticed how they leaned toward each other for comfort. As the sun rose higher, Tom knew he needed help. This was more than he could handle alone. He walked back to his house and picked up the phone. He called a local animal helper named Ben. Ben had helped many farmers in the area and understood animals well. When Ben arrived later that morning, he walked straight to the shelter. He knelt down and looked closely at the donkeys. He touched their sides gently and listened to their breathing. He asked Tom questions about where they were found and how long they might have been alone. Ben nodded slowly as he worked. He said the donkeys were badly underfed but not beyond help. He explained that recovery would take time. He warned Tom not to rush the process. Too much food too fast could cause harm. Tom listened carefully. Every word mattered to him. He wanted to do everything right. Ben gave clear instructions. Small meals, clean water, rest, warm shelter. Most of all, patience. He said kindness would be just as important as food. After Ben left, Tom felt a mix of relief and responsibility. He understood now that the donkeys would depend on him every day. He was ready for that. The rest of the day passed slowly. Tom cleaned the shelter, removed old boards, and fixed small gaps to block the wind. He brought fresh straw and made the space warmer. He spoke softly while he worked, letting the donkeys hear his voice. By afternoon, the donkeys looked a little more alert. They moved their heads more. They stood with a bit more balance. Tom smiled when he noticed these small changes. To him, they meant everything. He decided it was time to give them names. The gray donkey reminded him of the quiet ash color of early morning. He named it Ash. The brown donkey had gentle eyes and a calm presence. Tom named it Milo. He spoke their names out loud, slowly and clearly. Ash flicked an ear. Milo looked at him for a long moment. Tom felt a strange warmth in his chest. Naming them made them feel like family. As evening came, Tom sat outside the shelter and watched the sky change colors. Ash and Milo stood inside, resting. The land felt different now. It felt alive again. Tom thought about the broken fence where he had found them. He wondered how long they had stood there. He wondered how many people had passed without stopping. The thought made him sad, but it also made him grateful that he had listened to his heart. That night, Tom slept a little better. He kept his door open so he could hear the shelter if anything happened. The sounds of the ranch were calm. Crickets sang softly, and the wind moved through the grass. In the middle of the night, Tom woke up and checked on them again. Ash and Milo were lying down, resting peacefully. That was a good sign. Tom smiled quietly and returned to his bed. The next few days followed a steady rhythm. Feed, clean, check, rest. Tom stayed close, watching for any sign of trouble. He learned their habits and their moods. He learned which one liked to eat first and which one preferred to wait. Ash began to show curiosity. It would step closer to Tom when he entered the shelter. Milo remained gentle and calm, always staying nearby. Their bond was strong, and Tom respected it. One afternoon, Tom brushed their coats gently. Dust fell away, and their fur began to look healthier. The donkeys stood still and allowed it. Trust was growing, slow but real. As the sun set again, Tom leaned against the fence and looked at the shelter. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the feeling of doing something meaningful. He knew the journey was not over. There would be hard days ahead. But he also knew something else. That broken moment on the dusty road had turned into a path of care and hope. And this was only the beginning. Time moved slowly on the ranch, but every day brought small changes. Tom followed the routine with care. He woke early, checked the shelter, and made sure Ash and Milo were comfortable. He never rushed. He remembered Ben's words about patience and followed them closely. After a week, the donkeys looked different. They were still thin, but their eyes were brighter. Their ears moved more, catching sounds around them. When Tom walked toward the shelter, they noticed him right away. That simple reaction made him smile every time. Tom spent hours near them, not always doing work. Sometimes he just sat quietly and let them get used to his presence. He believed animals understood calm energy. Ash slowly became curious. It would step closer and sniff the air near Tom's hand. Milo stayed back but watched carefully. One afternoon, Tom decided to open the shelter door and let fresh air in. The sun filled the space, and the smell of grass drifted inside. Ash took a small step forward, then another. Milo followed slowly. They stood at the doorway and looked out at the open land. Tom did not push them to walk outside. He knew they would move when they felt ready. Instead, he stood nearby and spoke gently. He told them about the ranch and the quiet life they would have there. Later that day, a neighbor named Luke stopped by. Luke had heard about the donkeys and wanted to see them. He stood quietly and listened as Tom shared the story. Luke shook his head with sadness and respect. Luke offered help. He brought extra feed and helped Tom repair a fence near the shelter. While they worked, Ash and Milo watched from a distance. They did not seem afraid. They were learning that people could be kind. As days turned into weeks, strength returned slowly. Ash began to walk with more balance. Milo spent more time standing instead of resting. Their coats grew smoother as Tom brushed them regularly. Dust no longer clung to their fur the way it once had. Tom noticed their bond growing stronger too. They stayed close, always aware of where the other was. When one moved, the other followed. It reminded Tom that they had survived together, and that connection mattered. One morning, Tom brought them a small amount of fresh grass from the field. He watched carefully as they ate. They took their time, chewing slowly. There was no rush, no fear that it would be taken away. That trust meant everything. Tom felt a deep sense of purpose. His days felt full again. He no longer felt the quiet emptiness that had followed him for years. Caring for Ash and Milo gave him something steady and meaningful. Sometimes at night, Tom sat outside and thought about the moment he found them. He remembered their tired eyes and the tears he could not stop. Those tears no longer felt heavy. They felt like a reminder of why kindness mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ash walked toward Tom on its own. It stopped close and lowered its head. Tom reached out slowly and touched its forehead. Ash stayed still. That moment felt like a promise of trust. Milo stood nearby and watched. A few moments later, Milo stepped closer too. Tom placed his hand gently on Milo's neck. Both donkeys stood calmly, breathing slowly. Tom felt his chest fill with quiet joy. Word about the donkeys spread through the nearby farms. People spoke about Tom's kindness. Some came to visit. Others sent food or supplies. Tom thanked them but stayed humble. He believed he had only done what was right. Ash and Milo began to explore a small fenced area near the shelter. They walked slowly, sniffing the ground and feeling the grass under their hooves. The open space seemed to give them confidence. Tom stayed close during these moments. He watched carefully and stepped in when they grew tired. He always made sure they returned to rest before pushing too far. As weeks passed, their bodies grew stronger. Their ribs were less visible. Their steps were steady. Their eyes held curiosity instead of exhaustion. The change was clear. One afternoon, Tom noticed something that made him pause. Ash let out a soft sound that was not weak or tired. It was calm. Almost happy. Tom laughed quietly and wiped his eyes. Not from sadness this time. Milo followed Ash across the small field, moving with ease. They looked like donkeys again, not shadows of what they had been. Tom stood by the fence and watched them, feeling proud. That night, Tom wrote a few notes in an old journal. He wrote about progress and hope. He wrote about how caring for Ash and Milo had changed him. He realized healing went both ways. As the stars appeared in the sky, Tom closed the journal and looked toward the shelter. Ash and Milo stood together, calm and safe. Tom knew the hardest days were behind them. The future still held challenges, but it also held promise. What began as a moment of tears on a dusty road had become a story of trust, patience, and quiet strength. And still, their journey continued. Life on the ranch slowly found a new rhythm. Each morning, Tom woke with a clear purpose. He checked on Ash and Milo before doing anything else. Their presence had become part of his daily routine, like the sunrise and the quiet wind across the land. Ash and Milo were stronger now. They walked around the fenced field with steady steps. Their bodies still needed care, but their spirits were different. They no longer stood with lowered heads. They looked around with interest, noticing birds, insects, and distant sounds. Tom decided it was time to expand their space a little. He repaired an old fence that led to a wider grassy area. He worked carefully, making sure everything was safe. When he finally opened the gate, he stepped back and waited. Ash was the first to move. It took slow steps into the new space, stopping often to look back. Milo followed closely, staying near. The grass was fresh, and the ground felt soft under their hooves. They walked, rested, and explored at their own pace. Tom watched quietly from the fence. He did not interrupt or rush them. He believed moments like these needed space. Seeing them enjoy simple freedom filled him with a calm happiness. As the days passed, visitors continued to arrive. Neighbors came with children who asked questions and watched the donkeys with wide eyes. Tom shared the story gently, focusing on hope and care. He never spoke with anger about how the donkeys were left behind. He believed the present mattered more than the past. One afternoon, Luke returned with a truck full of supplies. He helped Tom build a stronger shelter roof and brought tools to improve the feeding area. Together, they worked under the sun, talking about small things and life on the land. Ash and Milo stayed nearby while they worked. They no longer hid or stayed distant. At times, Ash walked close and watched their movements. Milo preferred to stand in the shade but remained alert. Tom noticed how the donkeys responded to calm voices and gentle movement. He realized they trusted the environment now. That trust had been earned day by day. Later that week, Ben visited again. He checked Ash and Milo carefully and smiled at the changes. He said their recovery was going well. He reminded Tom to stay patient and steady. Tom nodded, knowing that patience had brought them this far. That evening, Tom sat near the fence and thought about his life before Ash and Milo arrived. The ranch had felt quiet in a heavy way. Now the quiet felt peaceful. The donkeys had brought energy and meaning back into his days. Ash and Milo had also grown more playful. They nudged each other gently and moved with light steps across the grass. These small signs made Tom laugh quietly. He had not laughed like that in a long time. One morning, Tom noticed Ash standing alone near the fence, looking out toward the open land. Milo stood a short distance away, resting. Tom walked over slowly and stood beside Ash. They looked at the land together in silence. Tom felt a deep connection in that moment. He understood that healing was not just about food and shelter. It was about feeling seen and safe. Ash seemed calm, breathing evenly, standing tall. Milo joined them after a while, standing close as always. The bond between the two donkeys had never weakened. Tom respected that bond and made sure they were never separated. As word spread, people spoke of the ranch as a place of kindness. Some asked Tom for advice about caring for animals. He shared what he had learned, always stressing patience and attention. Tom never thought of himself as special. He believed anyone could help if they chose to stop and care. Still, he understood that not everyone would make that choice. That made his decision even more meaningful. The seasons began to change. The air grew cooler, and the land slowly shifted colors. Tom prepared the shelter for colder nights, adding extra straw and checking for gaps. Ash and Milo adapted easily, trusting the space they now called home. One evening, as the sky turned deep orange, Tom stood by the fence and watched the donkeys walk toward him. They moved calmly, without fear. Ash stopped close and lowered its head slightly. Milo stood beside it, steady and calm. Tom reached out and rested his hand on Ash's neck, then on Milo's. They stood still, sharing the quiet moment. The sound of the wind and distant birds filled the air. Tom felt a deep sense of peace. He knew the hardest part of their journey was behind them. The tears he had cried on that dusty road now felt like a distant memory. What remained was trust, growth, and quiet strength. As night fell, Tom guided Ash and Milo back to the shelter. They walked willingly, knowing it was a place of safety. Tom closed the gate and checked everything one last time. He stood there for a moment, looking at the stars above the ranch. He felt grateful for the choice he had made, grateful for the lives that had crossed his path. The story of Ash and Milo was no longer about survival alone. It was about healing, connection, and the power of simple kindness. And one more chapter still waited ahead. The ranch felt alive in a way it never had before. Morning light spread gently across the fields, and Tom stood near the fence with a quiet smile. Ash and Milo were already awake, standing close together and watching the day begin. Their bodies looked strong now, their coats smooth, their eyes calm and clear. Tom remembered the first day he saw them by the broken fence. The memory still felt heavy, but it no longer brought pain. Instead, it reminded him how much could change when someone chose to care. Ash walked slowly toward Tom, stopping just a short distance away. Milo followed as always, staying close. Tom spoke softly, greeting them like old friends. The donkeys listened, their ears moving gently with his voice. Tom opened the gate and guided them into the larger field. The grass was fresh, and the land stretched wide. Ash stepped forward with confidence. Milo followed, calm and steady. They moved freely now, no longer afraid of open space. Tom watched them explore. They walked, rested, and moved again. At one point, Ash picked up speed and took a few playful steps. Milo responded by following, and the two moved together across the field. Tom laughed quietly, feeling a warmth in his chest. Over time, the ranch had become a place people talked about. Neighbors stopped by more often. Some brought small gifts of feed or tools. Others simply came to see Ash and Milo and hear their story. Tom always welcomed them kindly. One afternoon, Luke arrived with his family. They stood by the fence and watched the donkeys walk calmly across the field. Luke said it was hard to believe these were the same animals Tom had found weeks ago. Tom nodded, knowing how far they had come. Ben visited again later that week. He checked Ash and Milo and smiled with satisfaction. He said they were healthy and strong. He told Tom the donkeys had a good life ahead of them. Tom felt proud, but he also felt thankful. He knew he had not done this alone. As the days passed, Tom noticed something else changing. He felt lighter inside. The quiet sadness he had carried for years was fading. Caring for Ash and Milo had given him purpose. It reminded him that kindness mattered, even when no one was watching. One evening, as the sun lowered, Tom sat on the fence and watched Ash and Milo rest near each other. The sky glowed with soft colors, and the land felt peaceful. Tom thought about how close he had come to riding past that broken fence without stopping. He realized that life often offered moments like that. Small moments that asked for a choice. Sometimes those choices changed everything. Ash stood up and walked toward Tom. Milo followed. They stopped close, standing calmly. Tom reached out and rested his hand on Ash's neck, then on Milo's. The donkeys did not move away. They trusted him fully now. That trust meant more to Tom than words could say. As night came, Tom guided them back to the shelter. They walked in easily, knowing the routine. Tom checked the gate, spread fresh straw, and made sure everything was secure. He stood there for a moment, listening to their calm breathing. Later, Tom sat on the porch of his house, looking up at the stars. The ranch was quiet, but it was no longer lonely. He felt connected to the land, the animals, and the simple life he lived. Days turned into months. Ash and Milo became a natural part of the ranch. They helped keep the land calm and brought joy to everyone who visited. Children laughed when they saw them. Adults smiled and felt hope. Tom never forgot where Ash and Milo came from. He kept the memory close, not as pain, but as a reminder. A reminder that suffering could be met with care, and weakness could turn into strength. One morning, Tom walked the same dusty trail where he had first found them. He stopped near the broken fence, now repaired. He stood quietly and looked around. The land was still dry in places, but it felt different. Tom knew that road would always mean something to him. It was the place where his heart had broken and healed at the same time. When he returned to the ranch, Ash and Milo greeted him calmly. They stood strong, healthy, and safe. Tom smiled and felt a deep sense of peace. The story of the starving donkeys was no longer about tears and pain. It was about choosing kindness, staying patient, and believing that small actions could lead to great change. Tom had not only saved 2 lives that day. He had found his own healing along the way. And as the sun set over the ranch, Ash and Milo stood side by side, living proof that compassion always leaves a lasting mark.